You guys, as I mentioned, I was going to get someone from the library to come in to go over the resources for the paper that you have to do for the class. Just lucky enough to get Andrew to come in today. There was a bit of a last minute kind of setup. We agreed on the time yesterday, which was nice. So he'll be talking to you for about 40 minutes or so. Show us some resources, and provide us some documents that we put up on the portal for you to help with the research paper, okay? And whatever he's done, we'll get back into our content. Okay, we'll get into the material. Sounds good? Any questions? No? Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So, hi everyone. I'm Andrew Nicholson. I'm the geography liaison librarian here at UQM. You may have seen me in some other geography courses that I'm going to remember to give talks on finding the water research resources. I also do short talks on using software, data, and that kind of thing. Before I actually start getting into it, I just want to let people know that don't go crazy like taking tons of notes out. We'll be making these slides available in today's class, so don't feel like it's right down So to get into the session, I wanted to first just kind of show you where you'll be able to actually look at research resources. So there are a couple places. So if you go to the portal shelf, of course, to find, there's a link in the website research guide, and also on the library website. If you go to the website, you scroll down, you'll see there's a starting points box, and if you click on the geography link, you'll see a menu like this. And you click on geography course specific resources. I've got a bunch of courses there which are going to, which are created these research guides for. So you'll see the guide in there. This is what it looks like. And now on this page, and I'm going to go through these in a bit more detail, apart from the data resources. I'm not going to cover that. First thing you find information is there's information there on peer review, and I'll talk about that. And talk about that in a second. Research resources, these would be like databases. We can find peer-reviewed articles. And data resources I wasn't going to talk about, but then at the end you're citing your resources. And I know the instructor would like to use the ABA citation style. And on the citing resources page, I've got first links to resources that I think you'll find really useful for citing using the ABA style. Before I continue, can anybody tell me or tell others what does peer review mean? Okay, how many have heard of peer review like in other courses? Okay, so quite a few people have kind of heard of it. Can anybody explain what peer review is? Yeah. That's right. So, I'm not sure if everybody heard that, but it's basically research that is being reviewed by others in the field, by experts in the field, prior to publication, and then once it's been approved, then that research article is then published. So here I found it to be kind of interesting just to kind of point out to you the kind of actual process. And I'm not sure how many of you have heard about the process of peer review in other courses. So basically what happens is a researcher will put together a research paper, they'll look up other articles and so forth, and they'll put a paper together, and then they'll submit it to a journal. And at that peer review journal, there's going to be an editorial board of peers or fellow experts in the field, and they're going to be the ones who are going to be reviewing the paper. They're going to be checking the originality of the research, the methods, the soundness of the research, like is the person who's written the paper, have they been thorough in the research that they've done? Perhaps if they've been doing surveys or some data collection, like is the methodology, is it sound? They'll also check references and that type of thing. They want to make sure essentially that the research is going to be original research. So what will then happen is once the peers sort of go through it, they may accept the paper without with no revisions. They'll accept it and it's published. But more often than not, what will happen is they'll reply to the author of the paper and they'll suggest some modifications to the paper. So they may ask for more explanations, perhaps more about maybe more of a literature review. Perhaps methodology might need more explaining, that type of thing. So there's usually going to be some revisions that will take place. And so the author will then, if they want to continue publishing, if they want to publish in the journal, they'll make the revisions, and then they'll send the article with the changes back to the journal, and then the article will then be published. And then of course the third option here, sometimes the peers may just reject it out of hand. They decide for whatever reason that this article does not fit if the article doesn't kind of stand up to scrutiny of original research, or it may be kind of outside the mandate of that journal, outside the scope of that journal. There may be a whole number of reasons why they do reject it. So essentially there is this kind of process of review that takes place. So this is very different from an article you may find in the Claims magazine or newspaper articles where those people are just sort of writing kind of newsy type articles, and then an editor of that magazine or newspaper may just publish it. The purposes are very different there, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. So anyway, once the peer-reviewed article is accepted, it's then published in the journal, and then it is deemed a peer-reviewed article. Now, one thing which I know always surprises students is the length of time that the peer review process takes. And it can take anywhere from a few months to a few years. And what I always find interesting is when you're looking up articles and you come across some articles you want to use in the paper, quite often they'll have that kind of timeline at the bottom of the article. Yeah, sorry, not everybody can see this, but if you take a look at these slides after class, you'll know what I'm talking about. So here's an example article I just grabbed, a screen grab of, and so these are kind of characteristics defined of a peer-reviewed article. And one of them is the timeline for the peer review process. So this article here on globalization and regional change in the U.S. furniture industry. So this paper here was written by Professor Drazy, and he submitted it in October 2006. So submitted to the journal, and then the revised copy was accepted, submitted in January 2008. So over a year took place while the professor made some modifications and so forth on the article. And then it was finally accepted in February 2008. So there's quite a long process here of the article being written, being submitted, modifications taking place, and then the article finally being published and then being made available to the research community. So essentially that's kind of the peer review process that takes place. So there's quite a bit of time there. It doesn't happen instantaneously. Other characteristics of peer-reviewed journals, quite often students will come to the library and they find an article they really, really like, and they're not really quite sure whether they're peer-reviewed. So I always like to point out some things that you can always spot right away that you'll know that it's a peer-reviewed article. So first off, at the beginning of the article, there's going to be an abstract or summary of what the article is about. And then there's also going to be some kind of author affiliation or author bio information. So Professor Drazy, I know he's a professor because at the bottom of the first page of the article, it says so. And he's a professor in geography at California State University. And so that information is right there, plus his contact information. So when you see that, you know right away, okay, this person has some solid research credentials. They're a professor at a university in the United States. And so if you imagine, say, like, you don't really see that in magazine articles or in some other non-peer-reviewed research. You may just have the person's name, but you don't really know what their background is. In peer-reviewed articles, the author's background is always provided, so you always kind of know kind of where they're coming from. And if you want to, you could also kind of go and do a bit of background searching into kind of what this professor, what their expertise is. Quite often they'll have a research webpage at the university, that kind of thing. So that's also another avenue to explore for research. So perhaps if you really like Professor Dre's paper, you can then go to Google his name, and find his other research papers through his website. So that's another possibility. Finally, another characteristic is references. There's always going to be a reference list or bibliography at the end of the article. A few other points here. So here I have a little table of just the difference between scholarly, peer-reviewed sources and non-scholarly. And some of these I've already talked about. So really, two different audiences. So the non-scholarly newspapers, magazines, they're kind of published for more commercial purposes. And the editor will be their job will be to have articles published so that a magazine or journal can make money. While in the research community, peer-reviewed research, peer-reviewed journals, the idea is that they're disseminating research, they're spreading knowledge, information. So really the two different purposes, in many cases two different audiences. So something to keep in mind when you're kind of looking for different sources. Okay, so any questions so far? We'll kind of cover quite a bit there, peer-reviewed stuff. Any questions? So I just want to talk to you about searching for articles. And I'm not going to mention all of the databases that I've linked in the research guide. I'm just going to mention a few of them. But generally, the approach should be the same when you're doing research. So what I generally recommend is that you kind of start off with a kind of a broad type of search. I'm not sure if any of you have your topic in mind already, or maybe you have a general idea. But I'm sort of going in, I'm kind of pretending I'm a student, of course, I'm kind of going in thinking, well, I'm kind of interested in globalization issues surrounding furniture industry. But at this point, I don't really know what's out there. So what I always encourage students to do is try some preliminary researching around a kind of general topic. So perhaps take like globalization as a keyword, put that in and see what comes up. And then, as you're kind of doing that, think about different aspects of the topic. Think about different political perspectives, different geographical perspectives, different countries, how they may view globalization, or in my case, globalization in the furniture industry. There's going to be differences of perspectives around the world among different groups of people and so forth. So it's always important to kind of keep those in mind. And also when you're kind of doing this, when you're writing a paper, you probably want to be comparing and contrasting different sides of the viewpoints around the issue. I find if you have sort of differences of viewpoints, that actually I find writing the paper to be much easier that way. So you've got people with different perspectives, and then you can put those into your paper and sort of kind of play them off one another, that type of thing. And same with geographical perspectives as well, different countries, so compare and contrast. So what I'm done here is I've kind of taken my broad topic and done a little bit of searching around, and so I've come up with a research question. So this is kind of what I want to find out. So what is the impact of globalization on Canada's furniture industry? So I've kind of narrowed my search down. to look at Canada and globalization. So I just want to show you how I kind of arrived at that here. So now I pulled out a few keywords. So again, starting with the really broad search, so globalization. Do a search, I got a couple screenshots I'll show you in a second. I got a huge number of hits. Globalization was a very big topic, very timely today. Way too many hits to kind of really go through in a short period of time and prepare a paper. So this is when I wanted to start narrowing it down. So I went to globalization furniture, again, a lot of hits, and then I got Canada, and then gradually my search starts to narrow. And I'm also going to be using subject filters, also do data publication too. I find this to be the really handy filter, very important as well for kind of narrowing down the results. And I'll talk more about that in a second. And then also using other keywords to kind of help narrow down your search. Now, like I was saying, I wasn't going to talk. I don't have time to talk about all of these, but I did want to talk about the first one, Summon, and then also the Web of Science. So Summon is, suspectedly many of you have seen it because it is the kind of, I just like to call it UT's answer to Google. In that we have UT subscribes to many different article databases, peer-reviewed databases. And what Summon does is it's kind of like a common interface. So all these databases are kind of plugged into Summon. So you can do a search, and you'll search these hundreds of databases at the same time. So here I'm just putting globalization. So I've taken the select articles option, and put globalization in the box, and sure enough, I get over 1 million articles here, well over 1 million. So way too much. But this is where I start to then filter down my search. So on the left-hand side, the CBW search filters. So you're going to be wanting to look for peer-reviewed research. So first one is you want to select scholarly journals and then full text online. So you can select those, and then with the format, you're looking for journal articles. So once you kind of check those off, we'll see the number at the top there will shrink. So still a lot of articles, but still a lot better than over 1 million. And then what I've done here is I've added furniture at the top. So globalization furniture, over 7,600 articles. I kept my filters still the same, so I've just added that the additional keyword. And notice that I'm not even looking at this here yet. I'm not even bothering because there's so many. And you also want to focus in on the most current research out there too. So I mentioned the publication date. So I've added another keyword, Canada, and then I've kept my filters and format the same, and then the date. I highly recommend you go with either go with research for either the last 5 years or the last 10 years, depending on what results you get. I find with most research, 5 years is fine. But depending on the topic, you may want to stretch up to 10 years. Anything more than 10 years, 1 or 2 articles is fine. As long as if it's an important article, it's relevant to the topic. But you don't want to have the paper with tons of older articles and nothing recent. So you really want to be focusing on the most current research, and that's going to be limiting your publication dates to either the last 5 years or the last 10 years. And so kind of once I've done that, so notice here, I've highlighted it, I've got just under 1,000 articles. So that's looking way better. And then what I can start to do now is I can start to go through my list here. And before I do that though, there's also subjects you can also go look at too. This is a really nice way to really narrow in on your topic. So if you go with your subjects, and I apologize, not normally can see this. But one of them is furniture industry, selected here, and the other one is globalization. So that will pull out all of the articles that the Summon database has located that has furniture industry and globalization together as a subject identifier or like a tag. You know, it can just to be like if you're using social media, that kind of thing. You know, you're tagging friends or so forth, you know, Facebook or whatever. The subject identifiers are kind of the same thing. These are sort of tags. So these articles have been the articles I will look at. Have been tagged as furniture industry, globalization, and you can then pull them up and look at them. So here's one that I located. So globalization and innovation in furniture industry, furniture manufacturing in Canada, and it's actually written by Professor Gracie as well. So he wrote an article in the U.S. and now he's written an article in Canada. So which means Simon is you can look at the abstract and get an idea what the article is about, and then if it's something that's going to be useful for your paper, we can then go in and look at the full text. So the PDF, and then I find just another tool just to mention to you. Some of you may already know this, but if you're still not sure about peer review, like even when you look at the article and you see that there's an abstract and author affiliations and that kind of thing, there's also a tool we have in the library. It's called ORIX. So you can check to see the article. ORIX will tell you if the article is from a peer review or not. So I just thought to show you that. So when you pull up the full text PDF of the article, if you look under the more options link at the top, you'll see, you'll come to a page and it will basically say peer review, yes, and then if you want to sort of go in and see, if you click on the see all this, then it will pull up the actual journal name. So that journal, the article I was looking at came from the Regional Studies Journal, and you'll see it has this referee shirt, and referee means the exact same thing as peer review. You can use it interchangeably, many people do. So if you hear referee, it's the same thing as peer reviewed. So you just know that article is in fact from a peer reviewed journal. So just switching gears a little bit, I just wanted to talk about the Web of Science database. How many people have used the Web of Science before? Okay, so quite a few of you have. So here I'm doing a similar type of search again. So basically what Web of Science is, it includes like science articles, social science, arts and humanities, and some conference proceedings. And I think for this course, it's very much a social science area, business and geography. So I highly recommend if you're using Web of Science, some of the social sciences citation notes. And then you can also filter the date right on the top screen. So here I'm going the last 10 years, so 2017 to 2007. And here I'm putting in my keywords, so global and furniture. And notice here I'm putting in this star in global. And that's what we call a truncation or wildcard symbol. So this will pick up all the variations of the spelling of a word. And it will also work at Summon and most of the other databases, also know how to catalog. This is another way of searching to pick up variations of words. So here, this will pick up articles out of globalize, globalization, global, all the variations of it. I thought it really useful just so you can capture everything that's out there. So if you just have globalization there, there's possibly you might miss an article which may not use the term globalization, and use global instead. So I find it's just a good way to kind of go about it, especially if maybe you don't have that many sources. Fine if you put a start in a word. It works really well with words like environment too. Like putting it at the end of environment, so the environment. can work really, really well with voice like that where there's different variations and some. So one of the, I find one of the things that people really like about web science, and some of you who've used it before may like about it, is one of the things is your search results, you'll get the most recent first. Quite a few databases, when you do the search, you'll kind of get the most relevant. You'll kind of do the Google thing where you get the most relevant results. And I find myself helping students in the library in knowing that you're trying to get the most current research available. I personally find having the results most recent first to be more helpful. That's my personal opinion. I find Web of Science is really good for doing that. So that's kind of set as a default. So the news to be always. That's one of the things I like about Web of Science. Also, too, the keywords are highlighted, as you can see there. So here we are: globalization, furniture, and then also another thing that I like about it, I also know many researchers on campus with it, is that Web of Science is really the first database to kind of provide you with a full spectrum of the research out there. And by full spectrum, I mean it kind of gives you a time cited number and also cited references. So, with this article here by Carolyn Hash, who's at the University of Toronto downtown. So this article was published, and you can look at the cited references. So basically, her bibliography that she used in writing the paper, and there are links in many cases to those articles. But then you can also look at the time cited. So by time cited, I mean articles that have come out since Dr. Hatch's article was published. I used her article. So if we go back, so Dr. Hatch's article came out in 2013, July 2013, and I pulled up this article. Today, and so it's a 6 times cited. So 6 researchers since the article was published in 2013 have cited it in their own papers. So since 2013. So other researchers they found this article through the Web of Science. They've written new research based on what Dr. Hatch has written in her article, and then they published it. So you can kind of see, you get a sense of the influence or impact that this article's had on at least 6 articles so far, the time cited. And then if you want to, so you're kind of going forward from 2013, but then if you go to the cited references, you can kind of go back from 2013. So you kind of see what I mean. You can see the kind of spectrum of where this article falls, looking at that topic. So, and then the nice thing about the Web of Science is you can actually click on many of those hyperlink to those articles. So you can literally pull up articles that Professor Hatch or Dr. Hatch looked at, and then articles that were influenced by Dr. Hatch's work. So that's a really nice thing about the Web of Science. You can sort of see, you can get a sense of the influence of articles. Okay, and just a quick word about citations with PTA. So I mentioned under the Citing Your Sources link, I've got a number of links here for citing. I just want to draw your attention to a couple. So one is the Fairfield Library APA page, and also the Purdue Lao page. And what I really like about these is they kind of have examples with plug and play, where you can take your citation, take the author name, article title, journal title, pages, years, and that kind of thing. You can take those elements and you can put them into place The format here will tell you exactly where things should go. That's the question I get in library quite a bit is, students want to use AP, but they're not quite sure how to properly cite images. So I find these examples, both the kind of elements where elements should go, and then the actual example of an article citation be really, really helpful. So also giving you both for the bibliography and also the in-text citation as well. So, are there any questions? Okay, well, if you do have questions later on, or if you want some help finding articles if you're having some difficulties, feel free to contact me, and I'll be happy to meet with you. Best way to get a hold of me is to send me an email. My email is andrew.nicholson@utron.ca, and I'm on campus Monday through Friday, and I'll be here for most of the summer, so feel free to get a hold of me, and be happy to help.
So what we'll do is we'll just take about a 5-minute break while I get set up. And then we'll get started. guys all saw the article I posted? Read it? Got it? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through the remainder of Monday lecture. There's not much. There's not much there. And then we're gonna go on to the second one, okay? Remember our test is next Wednesday. So we need to get guys. We need to get three weeks of content before that. Yeah? Not just 3 weeks, or not 3 lectures. Yeah? 3 lectures of content need to be done before that time, or else we're gonna have a pretty crappy test. So we gotta move pretty quickly. Any questions from Monday? Everything good? Okay, so we left off on Monday talking about globalization and what it is. We looked at some pretty cool examples. Things like these are cool in terms of some things that would break some of these assumptions that we have in terms of what globalization actually is. And so this idea that the local doesn't matter, the global marketplace dictates what happens. This idea that we live in a borderless society. Which in fact is not true. Yeah, it is fundamentally a lie. But the rhetoric that goes alongside with these ideas is actually quite powerful. Yeah, and so we see this, as I mentioned, during elections. We see this in terms of business people. It's embedded in our culture, right? To hear these types of things. But again, it's not true. There's a local element that is extremely important that sort of determines what happens. And so the easiest way to look at globalization is to look at it in terms of a set of processes. Yeah? It's a process, not just one process, but 4. Right? So first, I'll just go over these quickly because I've already gone through them. But the first being localizing. Yeah? So this is the idea that you have economic activities that will actually concentrate in certain geographic places. And a lot of that has to do with how easy things can be transferred over space. Yeah? And so fundamentally the difference between what we call tacit knowledge and codified knowledge. Does that make sense? Okay, so for example, it is difficult, yeah, it's extremely difficult to think about certain types of information traveling across geographic space without losing some value there. So one big thing is employment. It's a labor market. Yeah? People with certain skills cluster in certain places. So these are important things to consider. Okay? When looking at these types of things. I want to make it clear that it's not necessarily. Sorry. Not necessarily all things cluster in space the exact same way. Yeah? Not all things need to cluster in space, but a lot of things do. Yeah? And they're reliant on where they're located. Think about research. Yeah? Oftentimes, you'll have clusters of universities, clusters of institutions that do similar things. And a big part of that is, again, for the easiness of flow, yeah, of information and material across the place. Internationalizing, which is probably the major thing that we think about when we think about internationalizing, or when we think about globalization, right? So products or operations, businesses moving across borders and setting up operations in other places. So the easiest way to sort of look at this is as foreign direct investment. So when we think about globalization, we think foreign direct investment, that is a company or an organization which has a head office in one market, basically opening up a subsidiary or business in a different market, right? The easiest thing to think about from a consumer perspective, where you see this would be internationalization in terms of retail. Yeah? So companies coming from different markets and opening up stores in different places. Make sense? Okay. Globalizing, so both extensive geographic spread and a high degree of functional integration, okay, in terms of operations, right, crossing borders, and then this idea of this regionalizing. And this is extremely important because a lot of what happens would not happen if there weren't agreements in place that made it easy for those things to happen. So, for example, organizations which eliminate tariffs on trade. Yeah, things like NAFTA, like the European Union, where things can cross borders quite free, right? There's free movement of goods and services across those places. That promotes these things to actually happen. And so you need these agreements. And so the really cool part about when you think about this is a lot of this has to do with local. Yeah? So you think about these regional agreements, right? Things like NAFTA, they are based on these regions. Yeah? Not the whole globe. There's not a trade agreement for everyone. Yeah? Since 1994, when the World Trade Organization was actually developed, you had this spike, this increase in the total amount of trade that actually took place between players. Yeah? But the agreements are at a local level. They're between certain parties and what would happen between those individual countries. And there's lots of these agreements that exist now. Tons of them. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay. So what causes globalization and interdependence? And so there's lots of things that are actually at the root of this. And ultimately, we kind of gravitate to very distinctive things. So one thing that we tend to gravitate towards is this idea of technology. Yeah? And say, oh, well, why is that? Well, because technology allows it to happen. And I think the easiest way to think about globalization is, or the drivers of globalization, is if you think about a car. Yeah? Technology is the vehicle which allows these certain things to actually happen. Does that make sense? You have a car, the technology has wheels. We're at a point where cars will actually drive themselves, and we're getting close to that. But generally, there's somebody behind that wheel operating that vehicle. Yeah? Does that make sense? Somebody is operating that individual vehicle. And so when you think about technology, or politics, or social, or whatever these things that we consider being the driving forces behind globalization, are oftentimes the vehicle. They're not the driver, the individual that's actually pushing that forward. And if we want to really dig deep into this, what we end up finding is that the people that actually regulate and promote these things to actually happen are basically two. And that's the state, government, right, which puts things in place to allow it to happen because there's some sort of benefit, either for the people or for themselves, and transnational corporations. Yeah, business, who might lobby and might have influence in certain laws being passed that would actually allow them to do certain things. Yeah? Technology allows it to happen. It's not driving it. Yeah? Anybody disagree with me? It's okay, you can disagree. Anybody view it differently? And there is arguments for that technology does drive it. Technology is kind of contagious, isn't it? Yeah? I think technology is contagious. It's like a bad disease. Yeah? It's like the flu. We don't need it. Yeah? But then once we have it, we don't know how to live without it. So you got to think about this idea of being connected. It becomes so important. People live their entire lives without needing that. Yeah, we didn't need to be connected 24 hours a day. I didn't need to get emails at 8 o'clock at night when I'm hanging out with my kids. I don't need that. Yeah? When you guys send me an email, when do you want the response? You wanted it before you sent the email. Because you had the question already. Am I right? Yeah? If I were to tell you that I'm 48 hours for a response to email, what would you say to me? You probably say nothing to me. But what would you say about me? Yeah? Did I want that? Think about how life's changed as a result of these things. We don't want that stuff. But now that it exists, the idea of not having it anymore is scary. And so what happens is you have this spiral effect of everybody trying to develop things that make us more connected. Yeah? That keep us more to keep us online, and so that it becomes this convenience thing. Let's develop things that make it more convenient for people. Like I said this to somebody, and they're like, "No way." I'm like, "I don't know, man. I think eventually we'll just like put computers in our heads, like it's like an implant. Put it in, and that's the end of it. Yeah. It's like, yeah, Google's going to develop something that they're going to implant into your brain, and that's just how it's going to work. Yeah. Unrealistic. Maybe not my time. Yeah. Could it get to that point? I mean, like what are we talking about here, right? Like in terms of, like at what point is it not acceptable anymore? Yeah. I'm TI, but I actually think in my life that someone going to put something in my brain that's Google things, or other things on my phone. But hey, my buddy has one of those Google Home things. Yeah? Hey Google, you ask a question and it answers the question. Like we were there on Sunday and I was like, hey, I have a friend who had breakfast seats. Or family who had breakfast seats. Anyways, I was at his house for breakfast and I was craving, I want to listen to the Beatles. And so I was like, hey, and I know it has this thing. So I'm like, hey Google, play the Beatles. And then it started playing the Beatles. And I'm just kind of sitting there and I'm thinking like, this is so, you don't really realize it in that moment, and then you kind of just sit back and you're like, I just spoke and something started playing, right? It's crazy, right, in terms of where we are. Anyway, so maybe the argument against it not being the driver is that once it gets traction like that, then it almost becomes this driving force. And that's it's an okay argument to make, right? I just feel like it doesn't happen on its own. There's a reason why we want that degree of connectivity. Something's driving that. Does that make sense? Again, my personal opinion. Any questions? Trade is extremely important. We'll talk about trade a fair bit. The movement of goods and services across borders. This is a driving force of globalization. It's something that's at the root of globalization that we're going to look at and talk about within 6 weeks quite frequently. Here we're looking at basically the importance of trade to national GDP. Okay, so the higher the figure that you have, the greater the dependence on external trade. And so the whole point of what I'm trying to show you here is that progressively through time, not taking that long ago, we're basically the 1960s, yeah, which is not that long ago. Yeah, your parents were probably born in and around this era. Yeah, you have this jump, these progressive increases in the amount of how reliant certain places are on actual trade. Yeah. Okay. The textbook is called Global Shifts. Yeah? And it talks about 3 major global shifts that actually take place, which allow these things to actually happen and transpire. So one, we have these macro scale trends. Yeah? Macro being global. We're going from the global side. Then we have these mesoscale trends. So things that are happening from a regional perspective. Okay? And then we have national scale trends. Bound by the geographies of the nations that they reside in. So, looks at things like the persistently rich, persistently poor, why. Yeah? We're going to talk about things like the resource curse. What's a resource curse? I'm sure some of you have heard this before. Who's heard of the term resource curse before? What do you think a resource curse is? I say resource curse. What am I referring to? Any guesses?
Is it when a country has a lot of one natural resource and they focus all their economy on that single thing, and it's a big deciding factor for them?
Being reliant on something. Reliant on a certain good, a certain natural resource. Yeah? That might be quite volatile. Yeah? Think about economies that are dependent on oil. They'll actually manipulate the supply, right? How much is in the market, how much oil is in the market, to do things to price. Right? This is what happened in about 3 years ago, it started, it was about 2 or 3 years ago when it all started, right, with the huge drop in oil prices in Canada. So a big part of it, in general, well, what basically happened is you had several countries that flooded the market with oil, yeah? Production increase. So what happens when there's more of something? What happens to the cost of it? It goes down, yeah? Starts to decrease. Okay? And so some markets that are completely reliant on these types of things start to suffer. Yeah? They start to suffer significantly. And so some places that are rich in natural resources encounter some of these problems, right? In relation to being, again, reliant on only one thing, or having the majority of their economy reliant on one thing, or one or two things. Okay? So we'll talk about this again as we move through the course. Here we have, from a macro scale trend, this is a look at trade between places. And so what we have is, you typically had 3 areas of trade, so you have Asia and Oceania, and parts of Asia and Oceania, Europe and North America. Asia and Oceania was Japan. Japan, I mean the triad was typically Japan, North America, and Europe, right? Which is a traditional triad in terms of trade. That's fundamentally changing. What we start to see now is all these little networks, these regional trade networks between places, these agreements that are being signed between a handful of players in order to promote trade, to promote business, and to promote, or to eliminate basically taxation between places. And so again, this is a really important kind of thing to consider here in terms of, because these agreements and what happens actually dictates who's going to buy your product, yeah, and what products are going to be so what products are important, yeah, in that time. Again, it depends on place and what people want and what is not, yeah. And so this is extremely important in terms of what happens. So in the last little while, we're talking about NAFTA all the time, but kind of forgot about NAFTA until you have Trump that comes in and starts to renegotiate some of these things and has some issues with some of the agreements that are in place in terms of what they're doing to certain industries in the United States. And all of a sudden, this conversation starts to creep up whether or not who wins, who benefits, yeah? Who are the winners, who are the losers of these types of agreements. So we start to see this. Brexit is another example of it. I think the really cool thing to sort of remember here is that the majority of trade that actually exists, although it is global, tends to happen, these agreements tend to be with neighboring countries. Yeah? So there's like an actual geographic context that binds where those things actually happen. Yeah? So places that share borders. Why is the European Union important? Why is it important? One, because it's the largest trading area in the world. You can see that. I'll give you a quick number. So, Europe is the world's largest trading region. 39% of world trade is done in Europe. World trade is done in Europe. 70% of that trade is actually internal. 70% of that trade actually happens internal to Europe by European nations, specifically EU members. Yeah? Because there's, in the EU, besides a bunch of other laws and things that restrict them, but one of the things that they can't do is, if you're a European Union country, you can trade with European Union members, and there's restrictions on how much you can trade with non-members, right? And so what's that going to do? Well, it's going to promote trade with people that you don't get taxed with. Yeah? So I can trade with you, and I got to pay X amount of dollars. I can trade with you, and I don't have to pay anything. Yeah, well, I'm going to opt for not having to pay. Yeah, or not being penalized for going outside of that. That's why countries want to get into the European Union, because it gives them opportunity from that perspective. There's all kinds of things, but that's just one perspective. So what else? Second, so I'll give you a quick second. 29% of world total comes from other Asia and Oceania. So other Asia, excluding Japan. Okay. 57% of that's internal, 12% to Europe, and 9% to North America. And then third on that list, North America, with 16% of the world total. The CIS stands for Commonwealth, that's the former Soviet Union. So, why is the European Union important? Besides this from a trade perspective. Yeah?
It's the most integrated region in the world.
It's the only one of its type. Yeah? So if we're talking about unions and the different types, and we'll talk about states, it literally is the only one of its kind in the world. Yeah? In terms of the degree of integration that exists between the different states. A unified passport. Yeah? Labor can move across those borders with ease. Yeah? You have the right to live anywhere. Just think about this. I was born in Canada, my parents were born in Italy. I have an Italian passport. With that Italian passport, I have the right to work and live in any European Union member country. I have never paid taxes or lived in Europe. I can vote. I can vote in Italy because I have an Italian passport. Yeah? Like there's something wrong with that? A little bit, isn't it? Like just, I mean, there's a tab where you're kind of like, should it be that easy? Yeah? Should it be that easy? I can. Like I can go work in Spain. I can go work in France. I can go work in Germany, Greece, Italy, Portugal, England up until recently. Yeah? Ireland. Yeah? She can work in these places. What's significant about that part of the world? Which is, I think, one of the more important aspects of the economic union. Yeah?
They have one currency.
So the currency thing, yeah? So there's actually a monetary, they don't have like fiscal regulations, so like people can tax, each country can tax whatever way they want, but the currency, I mean, will pose so many problems in its actual development. I mean, it was not everybody benefited off of the common currency at that time. Yeah? There's some countries like England who didn't have to adopt it. Right? But more importantly, a lot of what happened in that part of the world. Yeah. Wars. Lots of wars. Yeah? This is like a highly, it was not, think about the two major wars, there's lots of other stuff, but think about the two major wars, right, world wars. Right, there was issues there. So since the European Union started, you had no conflict, right, in that area. Great stability. Yeah? Is there value in that? Of course. Okay. Again, macro balance of trade. There's trade surpluses, trade deficits, depending on where you are, or sort of like the nature of your country. That's important because it affects a lot of things. So if you have a trade surplus, then it means you're exporting more than you're importing, which is more favorable but problematic if the surplus is too high. If you have a trade deficit, you basically live beyond your means. So why do you want this to be relatively equal? You want to be exporting and importing. You don't want to have a huge deficit or huge surplus. So what's the problem with a surplus? So let's go deficit. What's the problem with the United States, which has one of the largest trade deficits in the world, which means they're bringing in way more than they're actually exporting to other places. So what's our problem with that? Debt, you're reliant on other places, you're not self-sufficient, right? There's all these things that can arise from having large trade surpluses. Mussolini, in World War II, for World War II, actually forced Italians, farmers, to start growing wheat because there was too much of money being spent in foreign countries to import wheat. And so he actually went to farmers and said, like, look, here's a series of incentives for you to start to grow wheat. Yeah? We're spending too much. So it's food, right? Like there's a food, national security related to food, bunch of reasons why he did that. But yeah, you become reliant on other people, that's dangerous. Yeah, there's danger in that. Okay? Why is it bad to have a trade surplus? So think about China, huge trade surplus. Yeah, so they export more than they import. Now, why is that problematic? Yeah, so you have a trade surplus or deficit, you have a lot of money flowing out of your country, you have a trade surplus, you have a lot of money flowing into the country. Why would it be problematic to have money flowing into a country? Yeah. It can affect the currency, it can manipulate the actual price. It can actually make it unattainable for your general population to actually buy the goods that they're exporting. Yeah? Make it hard. If you're not able to absorb that surplus and invest into infrastructure and other things, basically, your people, yeah, it makes it difficult for them because of currency manipulation, yeah, to actually afford, that computer that's being sent out, clothing or whatever it might be. Yeah, so we see this in certain markets like China. Okay. This is looking at first-nation trade. Here's looking at services. Very different scenario when it comes to services, right? So the U.S. Trades a lot more. They export a lot more services than they import, right? Service-based stuff. A lot of some financial services. Yeah, within that. So they're not manufacturing products. They're moving into a different sector, right? That's what you're starting to see. This is agricultural trade. Canada and the U.S. both have trade surpluses, or at least as of 2008. Europe has a deficit. Okay, so they're importing more than they're actually using, and so, or than they're actually sending out. So this is another important thing, right? Because agriculture, food has a lot to do with national security. Yeah? Yeah? Huge implications when it comes to this. Okay. We talked about this, right? Or in broad, there's a line between the two. Here's your meso scale here. You got the vital art in Europe. Why is this important? Why is this area important? Yeah, we just talked about it. Lots of war. Yeah? This is a vital axis in terms of trade, right? In terms of trade, political with the EU, right? And a lot of countries that are part of this economic union. So imagine a variety of different outcomes. And so you think about the history that actually is there, no matter what the global sort of conditions are now with the European Union and the risk of other countries asking to leave, right, or voting on leaving. Think about this. What happens if Britain realizes they made a mistake? Just out of curiosity, how many people here think that Britain made a mistake? We're not going to debate it, just out of curiosity, who thinks they made a mistake? Who thinks they did the right thing? Who's not sure? Fair enough. So let's assume, under the assumption that they made a mistake. Let's assume that they left and they shouldn't have left. Okay? So they left and they shouldn't have left. And they want to get back in. Yeah? And let's say you are the committee that's going to decide whether or not you're going to allow them to come back in. Are you quick to open your doors again? How come? No, not necessarily. Well, that might be the case. I mean, you might be petty about it, yeah? There might be some definite concern when it comes to that kind of stuff, right? Like, you might be bitter. Yeah, there might be some bitter aspect to what took place. But more importantly, yeah.
They would encourage other countries to leave the EU. Like, they could leave and they come back, like...
There's no consequence.
Yeah.
And so what happens to all the countries that, are viewing it as a very negative thing? Or having a hard time? Say, hey, why don't we go and try not being part of this and then just put us back in? What's the consequence? Right? And so that's a very tricky thing, right? Because what happens if everybody wants to leave? It's problematic. Yeah? Poses problems. So, again, things to consider. This article, how it's shaped the past 100 years, think about the war. Nothing of that nature. This is the Maquiladora area in Mexico. A lot of industry there, auto manufacturing, all kinds of things that actually moved here. And so all the industry that moved along the border of the United States and Canada, United States and Mexico, happened because, truly happened because of opportunity for businesses to go over there, pay people their wages, and not be taxed on the goods transported back. And so you saw a lot of industry starting to develop along that border. Yeah? Tons of industry starting to develop along that border. And so what do you have? Right? Happened, well, all of a sudden, with currency changes, things like that, operations can jump back and forth pretty easily, pretty quickly. Okay? Again, this is part of some of these arguments that we're starting to see arise now. In 2008, 2007, from a manufacturing perspective, although manufacturing jobs were being lost in that state, they still were number one. Yeah? In terms of manufacturing. We heard about China, the big growth that was being experienced by China that was really the thing that caught people's attention. Well, that basically changed in 2013. Where they finally surpassed the United States in terms of the amount that they manufacture. So what China's basically become is it's become the global factory. Yeah? China is the global factory. There's a lot of merchandise that comes out, being produced, and sold out of China. Yeah? How does Japan do it? Well, you got to think about they're producing things, but are they rich in natural resources in Japan? Are they rich in natural resources? Far from it, right? Far from it being rich in natural resources. They're not rich in natural resources. Right? How do they do it? What is it about China that's interesting, or about Japan that's extremely interesting? Yeah. Sure. How are they able to produce things? Sorry? We do so efficient. Keep that in mind. We'll get back to it. Now think about Japan. What makes them? What did they develop that made them that efficient? Come on, think about it. Mass production. Yeah. I mean, not just cars. It's the idea of just time, right? They were very efficient in what they did, right? And that made it extremely attractive for production. Yeah, extremely effective. They basically, a new way, lean production originated in that area. Yeah? Very resource poor. Yeah? They don't have natural resources that are actually there, but they're efficient in what they do. Right? So things are being pushed there, they're creating, producing, and then sending elsewhere. Okay. Here we're looking at foreign direct investment. Obviously, the U.S. dominates this. So this is the amount of American companies in other places in the world. United Kingdom is on that list, obviously, as well. So you can sort of see this shift. But the U.S. is starting to pull back a little bit, right? You don't see them, accounting for the majority anymore. At a national level, there's other things that can be traded, okay? Not just in terms of things like labor. So here we're looking at basically talent supply and demand. And so at very entry-level jobs, places like Brazil have a surplus of people with entry-level skill sets, but they have a deficit of people at the higher level. And so what tends to happen is they might have them, and then they might immigrate or leave and bring those skill sets somewhere else. In Russia, you got a deficit at all levels. That has a lot to do with obviously historical context in terms of their political structure.
In terms of India, again, huge surplus at the bottom, that's at the top, same thing with China. And so again, what's happening is, I mean, it's a problem, right? Is that you have, a large pool at the bottom at entry level, and at the managerial levels, well, these people seek employment or opportunities in other places, other countries, and then we get a deficit, right? Of people that are actually able to work at those levels. Okay. Any questions? Okay. What we're going to look at now is we're going to look at merchandise trade, some key trends. We're going to look at the global production chain, the process in terms of how things are produced, the value-added chain of production. And then we're going to talk about papaya, which is the article that you were asked to read. This is an important, I like papayas, I think they're delicious. More importantly, I like that article because it explains something in a very cool way in terms of how products get to a certain place at a certain time. So think about something like this. Yeah? Do you find it weird that you can eat watermelon in December? Who thinks it's weird? It's weird. Yeah? That you can buy things that are not in season at your local grocery store. The products that you eat and you consume, yeah, can be from, it's also like, think about it, it's not just global, there's also like local discrepancies of different things, like no frozen whole foods, in terms of what you can get, right? But if you're willing to pay, you can basically get anything you want at any time. So those products are touching the lives of many different people, from many different parts and walks of life. Very different type of experiences in terms of who the consumers are in our marketplace as opposed to those marketplaces. And that article allows you to see it actually happen, how it takes place. Yeah, and the people that it touches and who it affects. And it's pretty fascinating. The article's pretty cool, easy to read. Yeah, agreed. It wasn't too hard to read. Pretty entertaining. Kind of sad at times, but in terms of who it affects or how it affects certain people. Anyway, so we're going to look at the question what it is, and then we're going to look at it in terms of the example of papaya and how it flows through. There's a little stupid video. It's stupid. It's kind of cute. Like, it's about peanuts. It's about brown nuts, actually. It's like a cheesy song and a peanut dressed as a cowboy. So like 7 minutes long. We don't have time to watch it today. We're going to watch it at the beginning of next class, but it's a pretty cute thing that will help you understand the uneven geographies of production. Yeah? How subsidies play a role in these things. So again, something to keep in mind. Cool? All right. What do you notice? So this is a look at regional merchandise trade between certain areas, right? So you've got North America, South Central America, Europe, Asia, basically the former USSR, the countries that made up the former USSR, Africa, the Middle East. What do you notice about some of these numbers in terms of the percentage of trade? What do you notice? Just looking at the percent of trade between places, what do you notice about that? You know something interesting about merchandise trade? Yeah, so you're more likely to trade with yourself. So we're talking about this global, right? There's obviously this global trend, but even with that global, people are still trading with the people that are closest to them. Yeah? And so we see that, right? The number one trading partners are the ones that are, they trade most, so they trade most with themselves, right? So the number one trading partner is themselves. Anything else you notice? Well, first of all, look at the European Union. Yeah, Europe, 70%. Yeah? Quite high, right? We talked about it being the largest trading area in the world, or region in the world. What else do you notice? Remember, the EU has indirect fiscal policy. It's a monetary union, not a fiscal union, so it's based on currency, not based on expenditures and collection of taxes. It's
doesn't look at that kind of stuff. There's some indirect fiscal policy in the sense that they can control like interest rates. These are pretty uniform across those different places. But again, not in that traditional sense, you know, that they're monetary, not like, so people can tax, each country can tax any way that they want. Anyway, do you notice anything else? Yeah.
Unless you're North America, Europe, or Italy, you're not really trading with anyone.
Outside of that? Yeah, so part of that has to do with who you're allowed to trade with outside of these agreements. So you gotta think about Europe. There's a penalty to trade outside of the European Union. There's a certain amount that you're allowed, that each member is allowed, right? So what does that do? Well, that discourages trade with anybody else, right? It's a huge, it's discouraging, right? So this is one of the problems with the Brexit stuff, because now Britain has to literally renegotiate all of their trade agreements. One being that with the European Union, where the majority of the trading partners were actually, where they existed. And so think about how problematic that could be. Yeah? Does that make sense? What else you notice? Highlight it for you. Yeah, they're like almost number 2 on every single list. There's a geography to it, obviously proximity plays a role, right? But they're not number 2, they're number, like a very close number, like so for South Central Asia, or South Central America, they're 3rd on the list. Actually, South and Central doesn't really themselves very much. There's a history there, their number 1 trading partner is still North America. Yeah, and so there's a bit of like, you know, there's history as to why that actually happened. We'll talk more about that when we look at states. So besides that, I mean, they're like number 2 on the list for every other country. Okay, trading with themselves, they're not trading with themselves, they're trading with Asia. Yeah? So again, Asia is sort of the factory of the world, right, in terms of where things are actually being produced. Here we're looking at the global production chain. And so there's 4 elements, and this, I want to make something clear here. This is a highly complex, extremely complex thing. But in business schools, yeah, we like to look at things in a very linear way to help make sense of what it is. So although it's not linear in this way necessarily, we like to put it this way so it's easier for people to understand. So there are 4 aspects of the global production chain. Yeah? Each link, right, or each phase will add value to the production process. Now that value could be from a monetary perspective, or there's value in what the good actually is. Yeah, so think about wheat. Wheat has one cost, and the wheat's processed, and when it's processed, it has a different value, there's value added to it, and then it's like turned into bread and sold to people. There's value being added at every stage, okay? First stage being research and development, second being manufacturing, third being marketing and distribution, and the 4th being consumption, okay, so people consuming those individual goods. So materials and products will flow through the 4 stages, and information feeds back in, and so sort of like a cycle, and then things will change, yeah? Based on that information that's coming back, to update the good, make it better, whatever like that. You can use your imaginations in terms of what this would be. In the papaya example that you looked at, yeah, what was the information that was coming back? Where did it change? What came back that changed the actual product in the papaya article? Yeah. No. Specifically has to do with location. What was it? Where were the papayas coming from? Initially. Where are they coming from? Come on, guys. Yeah. Brazil. What was the problem with the Brazilian papaya? There's a problem with the Brazilian papaya. How did it get to the market? Yeah. By boat. And what did that mean? You had to pick it earlier. It didn't ripe on the tree. And so
you had a subpar product. Yeah, so you have people in R&D trying to find a better product to bring to their stores, and this situation was in the UK. Does that make sense? That's an example of information funneling back. Yeah? And then you're looking for alternative options. Okay? Quality is a huge, huge part to do with these types of things. Okay, each aspect of the global production chain actually clusters in space. So R&D might happen in one place, manufacturing might happen in another, marketing, distribution in another, and consumption ultimately in another. So we can actually see this happen. So think about tech, right? Silicon Valley, right? Certain types of, the R&D is clustered in a certain place where it's actually happening. The production or the process of actually creating those things is not necessarily happening in those areas. Yeah? It's being moved out to other places. Think about Massachusetts. It's like one of the most smartest places in like the world. Yeah? And a lot of universities, high-end universities, clustered in a very small place. And so again, there's some legacy there. Yeah? Think about the Silicon Valley, the semiconductor example that we talked about on Monday. Yeah, same thing. R&D done in Texas. Yeah? R&D or in Houston or whatever, right? So R&D is done there. It's manufactured in Taiwan. Yeah? It's assembled and created in a series of countries, and then it's distributed to everybody. Yeah, because it's in real electronics. Does that make sense? Yeah, so again, these things cluster in space. Okay. Again, so it can spread across several countries, or it can cluster in certain countries, or it can be all in one country. It really depends on what kind of product you're dealing with. Simple products are very easy to look at in this sort of way. As products become a lot more complex, depending on the nature of the product, it could be quite difficult to sort of understand how this actually happens, and it can change quite rapidly. Can you give me any examples of maybe a product that would have some difficulties, or would change or wouldn't be as uniform in terms of this is the way it is and the way it's going to be? Any ideas? Yeah, so diminishing in terms of value or in terms of availability? Sure. So think about things like, let's say I find diamonds somewhere. Yeah? And I think say I find diamonds somewhere. They're biophysically, like they exist in different places, right? They're bound by the biophysical, right? So they're going to be somewhere. Think about the exploration. Think about the extraction of those types of goods. Yeah? Think about the process involved in actually extracting those goods. And again, these are things that are, they might be rooted in a certain place for a certain period of time, but the exploration process will change these countries and where things happen constantly. Yeah? So very much so. Right? So, you under certain conditions, it might be unaffordable to extract oil or crude, let's say, in certain markets. Things change. It becomes more economically viable to extract in those places. And so operations move back there. So you can start to see this in terms of what's being produced, and there's this dynamic, this shift that actually happens. Also, the product maturity will determine where things take place. Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit on Monday, but let's think about textiles. Yeah? Why do we not make clothes here? I mean, we still do. Like, there's still clothing that's made. Don't get me wrong. But why, if I was to do a survey in this class, and everybody tell me on their tags of their clothing, where it was made, why would, like, next to no one, I don't know if there would be somebody in this class. Anyone can guarantee me that their clothes are made in Canada or North America? Anybody? No? Like, for a fact? Anything that they're wearing right now is made here. Yeah? No, one person. Why? That's work. It's employment. Why? Yeah.
Labor is expensive?
Yeah, so the margins are different, right? If I produce the product here, that's a problem. The Gap went through like all kinds of crap in Bangladesh. You guys remember this? They had factories that were burning down and people were dying. And it happened the first time, like 10 years ago or something like that, it happened. And they went to the CEO of the Gap So they had this factory was making products for Old Navy, for the Gap, and for Banana Republic, which are all owned under the same company. So their factory's making whatever, factory burns down, people die. So they get called and say, hey man, they have a license to create your product. So they call them up, and it's not funny the response that they give. The first time it wasn't funny. The second time you're like, seriously, and the third time you're like, come on. So they call them up and say, hey man, this factory's making your clothes, and it burned down, all these people died, and the conditions and how the product was being made in Bangladesh was problematic, and you know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all what it said, right? All these problems. And the Gap, the spokesperson for the Gap basically said, hold on a second, man, we didn't contract that place, we contracted this place. Now, they subcontracted our goods to that place, and that place was not to our standards, but we didn't know. We didn't know that customer, you know, that factory A outsourced it, you know, part of the operation of factory B. We had no idea. Then, a few years later, it happens again. Yeah? And they say the exact same thing. Oh, wait, no, we don't know. Factory 1. I don't know what happened to factory 2. Yeah? Then it happened a third time. And at that point, you're like, all right, man. You either make agreements that say that your products can only be made in these facilities that are inspected and that you're aware of, or not. You can't just say, I don't know, when now you clearly do know that this is actually taking place. And so there's, again, work conditions are different. All about the profit margins. This happens all the time. All the time. Yeah? And so, when a product's in its infancy, yeah, the cost of those products is usually high. Right? Which makes it, you might be the only person, there's not much competition. Yeah? But the only person producing that. And so, you can produce it, costs more to produce, but again, that turnaround is higher. Actually, I read this thing that the production of an actual, you know, like a Tesla, green vehicle, it has a larger ecological footprint to produce one Tesla than it has to produce like a regular car. Yeah? So you're not actually like saving the environment by buying a Tesla. Now, the only reason that's true is because not everybody's driving a Tesla. Yeah? If the process got mainstream, like it's streamlined, and everybody owned a Tesla, then would that change? Yeah? With a total footprint, like, it's not a total footprint per car, it's a total footprint for the operation. Does that make sense? So what's being saved by having these electric cars in the marketplace versus what it's costing the factory to actually make them? Yeah, the steel, all kinds of stuff, right, that are coming into it. So, you know, these are questions that they start out anyway. So in infancy, cost is high, it's lucrative to do it in certain places. We see this with pharmaceuticals. Yeah? When companies have patents on the pharmaceutical, they'll produce it in one market. Once the patent's gone, it'll move to other markets, right? So think about Viagra. Yeah, Viagra is a really good example of this. Viagra was used initially to treat heart conditions. Yeah? They were testing it for heart conditions. People had, like, for blood flow or whatever. And then by default, they realized it did something else. Yeah? And they said, okay, now Pfizer had a patent on the drug, so nobody else can produce it. You guys remember we started seeing Pfizer commercials for Viagra? Like the guy skipping to work, and they're all happy all the time? You guys know what I'm talking about. You watched a sporting event, you saw a Viagra commercial. Yeah? Like every sporting event had a Viagra commercial, now it's Viagra or Cialis. One of the two. Yeah? Strategic in terms of who's watching this stuff. So, never saw a commercial for Viagra. We all knew Viagra existed. Yeah, everybody knew that it was a product in the marketplace. Never heard of it. Yeah, never saw a commercial about it. It didn't make a difference. Like, you went to a doctor and they gave you Viagra, it was a blue pill, it was the only one you could get. Yeah? Then all of a sudden the patent wears out, and all of a sudden I start seeing commercials for Cialis and all kinds of other things, right? And all of a sudden the generic drug makers are starting to produce those products. And then that gets outsourced to other places where they can manufacture, where it's cheaper to manufacture those products so that the margins are different. Does that make sense? Yeah? The drugs typically have patents. And so from a consumer side, how did you know the patent wore out? Well, you saw a commercial for the drug. Yeah? If I'm the only company that makes this medication, am I going to spend money on commercials? No, it doesn't make any sense. If you have erectile dysfunction, your doctor's going to only prescribe the one drug that exists. Yeah? So that's why you see commercials for like Lipitor, all kinds of different medications. Anyway, so pharmaceuticals will also displace based on where they are in their product life cycle. how many, how much competition's out there, what are the generic brands, how many generic brands exist, and so on and so forth. Yeah? I believe the pharmacies in Canada have to give you the generic brand unless you ask for the, is this correct? Yeah, correct. So if I go to the doctor and he says, oh Joe, you have high cholesterol, here's what, I'm gonna prescribe you Lipitor. I'm not actually getting Lipitor, which is a brand. I go to the drugstore, they're gonna give me a generic brand, unless I specifically say, I want Lipitor. And that's why you have those commercials that say, hey man, ask for Lipitor. Ask your doctor if Lipitor is right for you. Yeah, or whatever. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Trade liberalization. This has a huge thing to do with this production chain crossing borders and things being done in different places. Okay, it has a huge influence. And so when we talk about trade liberalization, we're just basically talking about the removal of trade barriers that might exist. Okay? And this basically would promote products moving between places. This is a trend again from after World War II, where we see this sort of happen, where we have freer trade between places. We see more and more free trade in the 1980s. And a big part of that had to do with the Uruguay round, which was a committee, it was a meeting of important countries, that actually sat down and started to talk about, and happened in 1986, 1994, talk about how trade would be developed. And so what came of the Uruguay round was basically the creation of the World Trade Organization. Yeah? And so at this time, we see this spike in the amount of trade that exists outside, globally, not just within these regions, but you have this major increase in the amount of trade that happens. We're currently in the process of another round. Countries are sitting down to have this conversation. It's called the Doha round, because obviously where it's taking place. This is very fundamentally different because the Doha round is not looking at trade, it's looking at agriculture. So it's not looking at product merchandise trade, it's looking at agriculture. And so this round affects some of the poorest countries in the world, and it's basically stalled. It got stalled in 2008 after the Great Recession. Yeah, once the recession hit, we have this pull back on the minimum, sort of like pursuing these things. Okay. Next week, we're going to talk specifically about technology, this idea of transportation and communication. Obviously, this helps those things actually happen. So the free trade, that global production network, those different levels of it are obviously helped through the transportation and communication, so the increased availability of transportation, which reduce costs, and the fact that you have now infrastructure in place that can that is so quick, that information can travel much faster with less friction over distance. And so a big part of that had to do with, if I had a note that I had to send somebody before, I could only send that note to somebody as fast as the postal service was. Yeah, and that's how we got information. Obviously, we're living in a world now where information can happen a lot quicker because of the infrastructure that's available for us to do so. Obviously, there's uneven geographies within that, so we'll talk about that. But it's easy for a product to be made somewhere else and shipped somewhere else because the amount of time it takes to inform and get those products is a lot shorter than it used to be. Yeah? So now it's logical that I can have a car shipped from me from another country, of parts of that vehicle, and it only take X amount of time. And a very short amount of time for it to actually get there, or whatever it might be. Same thing with, just products in general, right? Things can move faster, farther, and a lot cheaper. Okay, so next week we'll talk all about that. There are three pillars of globalization. Yeah? There are three pillars of globalization. This is the important thing to sort of keep in mind here. So just one thing is three pillars. One is transportation. The second one is communications. Right? So you have transportation, you have communication, and the third pillar is trade liberalization. Without these three things, those are your vehicles. That's the vehicles we're talking about. The vehicle, the driver. They're not the driving necessarily. The TNC wants to leverage cheaper labor somewhere else. But they would not be able to do that if they didn't have the car to be able to do it. So the car being transportation, communication, right, the ability to actually, for information to pass, and trade liberalization. So an incentive to move production to another place without taxation. yeah, or with reduced taxation, right, or with more freedom, okay? The world is getting much smaller than it was in the past, and this is just in terms of the amount of time it takes you to travel, okay? The speed of travel. Okay. Okay. So the global production chain, again, is a sequence of functions linked by transactions in which each stage adds value to the process of production, right? So we have these 4 stages. Okay. Within that, okay, there are different dimensions that we need to look at that will actually affect how things happen at those levels. So the first one is governance. Okay, so we're talking about governance, we're talking about coordination and regulation of the production chain process. Yeah? How is it regulated? So who's responsible for governance? Yeah. The state can be, yeah? Who else? Think about your papaya article. Could it be the TNC?
Big companies.
Yeah, the company, right? The company might regulate how things happen. So if I'm an upscale grocery store, I can't have damaged fruit. Yeah, I can't have subpar fruit on my shelves because that is not what I sell. Right? Right, so again, you got coordination there that takes place. Okay, the third, or second element, is the spatiality. So where are different functions located in space and how are they connected to one another? And so, again, there's a spatial implication for R&D, there's a spatial implication for marketing distribution, for the production, and ultimately the consumption. You ever go to a grocery store and wonder how to eat something? All the time. Yeah? I love grocery shopping. I'm not allowed to do it anymore. If you're in any of the classes, you probably heard the story. I'm not allowed to grocery shop because I don't know how to do it properly. I'm hungry all the time, and so if I go to a grocery store, I end up spending like 5 times the amount of money that a normal person would spend. So there, I want that now. That looks good now, and then I overnight. It's ridiculous. Anyway. I love it. My favorite place to be in a grocery store is the produce section. Yeah, the colors, the smells, the fruit, the hot. I just love it. Yeah, it's like a grocery store with a clean produce section to me is like euphoric. I can stand. I can just go one by one and just look at stuff and like smell it. You know. Anyway, remember avocados? I grew up in a household where I never had avocado. Like, we didn't eat avocados. It just wasn't part of our diet. Yeah. Always curious about it. You know, I see people eating them all the time. Go to the grocery store and I see stacks of these things. You know, I kind of liked guacamole, but I knew guacamole wasn't really thing. I knew like I had to do something to get that into that. And like, well, how do you eat this thing? How do I pick this thing? How do I know it's right? How do I know whatever? And I'm the annoying guy at the grocery store that talks to you. Yes, you're like next to me. I'll ask you questions. I'm that guy. And so I'll never forget, man. The first time I had an avocado, this woman sat next to me and I said, I'm like, hey man, I want to buy these, but how do I know? Like, I don't know if it's a good avocado. Like, what do I do? I don't know if it's right. And so she taught me. She said, you flick where it gets pulled from. If you flick it, if it's green inside, it means it's good. If it's not, it's not. You wait till it gets soft and you eat it. I was like, oh. I bought them and I loved them and now I eat them all the time. Yeah. Now, I go to my local store. They have them. If I'm not informed, am I a patron of that good? Will I buy it? Think about how culture, so we're talking about spatiality, you want to talk about the spatial implication of where things are. Think about where you live, your traditions, your culture, yeah, even religion, and how you select food, or what the staples are in your culture, yeah? Like if I don't have pasta once a day, I am not happy. Yeah, it's just it's simple. People think it's ridiculous, and I know it's ridiculous, but I need to eat pasta at least once a day. Once a day I have to have it. So like I know that not like my wife doesn't, and it's not good for the kids and stuff like that. So she'll like I usually cook when I don't work, and I'll make myself just a little bit. Like have a little bit with whatever I'm eating, or I feel like I didn't eat. I could have 4 steaks, so if I had a bowl of pasta, I was like, did I eat today? I think I ate. Yeah? It's not, I'm not exaggerating. Now, that's a byproduct of the household I grew up in. My grandfather's old school. Yeah? My grandfather lived with me, lived with us. Yeah? Extended family, in one house. My grandfather used to eat half a kilo of pasta by himself. Every night, I'm not exaggerating, man. Every night, like you know the bowl, the serving bowl, would be incredible. That's what he ate. So it's horrible for you, I know it's bad for you, but you start to develop these cultural kind of things, right? That start to dictate how you function, how you eat. That's to do with location. Where do you come from? Think about, I work with a woman, she's from Hong Kong. Her husband's from mainland China. She's a little bit more liberal in how she eats. He's not. And so we were out one night and have a conversation, and she was sitting there and she's like, and he eats rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I was like, holy smokes. I'm like, how do you eat rice for breakfast? Like what do you put it with? And she's like, it's like a porridge thing that he makes. And I was like, this is unreal. And I sat there for hours having a conversation with the guy about how he ate rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I said, do you have to? And he's like, oh my God, like if I don't have rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it's like I'm miserable. And but it's absolutely fascinating. Just think about growing cycles and the type of products that come out of places. It's a big part. Think about fruits and vegetables. Yeah? The types of fruits and vegetables that you buy. Yeah? They're largely linked to your cultural background. If you're going to expand that, you need to be taught how. Yeah? You need to be taught how to consume within those markets. Think about quiet. Teaching people how to eat. Yeah? How to select. Yeah? All of us. I can give my examples because I'm talking, but I'm sure if you look at yourselves, yeah, and you look at your upbringing, your family structure, and what is normal, those customs, in terms of those foods that were in your home, I guarantee you, yeah, the grocery stores that your parents went to, or whoever you live with, or yourself, are linked, and you're looking at, you're going to places that have that cultural attachment. Yeah? Where there's a relationship between that. And this is why you select markets, you live in places that coincide with that identity. This is why we have ethnic neighborhoods. Because it gives you an opportunity to get those things. Yeah? Does that make sense? There's no T&T grocery store in my neighborhood. My neighbor's Chinese. There's no T&T grocery store in my neighborhood. T&T is bought by Loblaws, right? Loblaws bought them. The largest retailer in Canada bought an ethnic chain. Yeah? Why do I not have a T&T in my neighborhood? Do I not like cuisine that comes from that continent? Sure. Yeah? Do I not have Chinese food whenever I have an opportunity to? Sure. Can I appreciate it? Sure. Do I ever experiment at home with cooking and cook things that are not part of my culture? Of course. Yeah? Of course I do. But why is there no T&T in my neighborhood? There's not enough. There's not a critical mass large enough to sustain that business. I'm not going to T&T every day. Yeah? I'm going to Guyo supermarket. Yeah? Does that make sense? Yeah? So think about this. Think about lines. You go to a Food Basics. Every Food Basics you go to will have an international section. Yeah? That international section, pay attention to this, will differ based on the market area of those individual stores. Yeah? Food is one of those wonderful things. Yeah, it's one of those wonderful things that, things start to bleed through about who you are. I can make cultural assumptions about what your background is based on what you select in the grocery store. It's fun to people watch in grocery stores. You ever see someone grab something like, oh, I wonder what they can do with that. No, like I said, I'm the guy that asks. Like I don't wonder this way, hey, what do you do with that? Not how you eat that. Pretty cool. Anyway, so the spatiality perspective, time, number one. And then you got territorial embeddedness. How are different functions connected? Yeah, to certain places. And so there's a local aspect. So again, the spatial, different functions looking at space and how are they connected to one another. Territorial embeddedness. How are they connected to the market that they're basically within? Okay? From a governance or coordination regulation perspective, what's being basically coordinated is the production network itself. Who's responsible for this? Well, it can be the state. States can actually control certain industries. Food's a very common one. Yeah, there's regulation around food because of food security. Even airlines. Yeah, after 9/11, like that was it. Like airline, it became, state controlled, right? Because of fears of these types of things. National firms or transnational corporations. Okay, again, they'll control some of that operation. From a spatiality perspective, the geographic configuration, the extent of a production chain, the links that it connects, right? So what's the spectrum of this? Well, is it concentrated activities or are they dispersed? Obviously, within this, you need to think carefully about how economic process and developments that exist in different geographic scales interact with one another, and so how things are linked are obviously extremely important. And territorial embeddedness, again, patent laws, tax codes, things like that, right? That sort of control how things function. Think about, probably the easiest thing to think about here is Volkswagen. It's a really good example. Yeah, so car manufacturers, the laws around car, production will vary. So emissions laws, how high your lights can be, all these things are controlled by the local places that they're being sold in. Okay, and so for example, with the Volkswagen huge upset, right, they did something to bypass. They bypassed the emissions. Yeah, they actually put something like this was conscious. Like it wasn't like, oh man, we didn't know, the machine was broken. We thought that it worked. They put something in the vehicle. Yeah, that would bypass and make it pass the emissions testing, and they got caught. Yeah, so I got a buddy that bought a Volkswagen at that time, and his was one of these the diesel injected whatever, and he basically they offered him money. Like they had to offer the people money. They had an option to basically we'll fix your car, we'll give you the money, you can buy a new car. Basically give them incentives to go back to the store and actually buy another Volkswagen. Now, a lot of that has to do with the laws that are in place in the markets that are being sold. That is not static. It's not the same everywhere. This is where I get to the importance of states. Yeah? They control, they regulate these types of things. Yeah, so think about shark fins. Yeah? They're banned in some countries because of the process of obtaining them. Does that make sense? So again, there's regulation depending on where you are. Obviously patents, right, around the way that certain things are produced and how they're produced. Okay. We don't have time to talk about the apply in detail. It's the first thing that we'll do when we get back to class on Monday. Any questions before I continue? Or before we end? No? Please, if you did not read it, and I can see by the faces when I ask I'll read it. You will be tested on it. In-class discussion will not be sufficient enough to answer that question properly. Okay? Coordinate, you read that already.